Incredible.
Isn't it? And
Yes.
that's what's so wonderful. And here we will be in a few minutes. Both of you will be seen by people you have not seen in a while. So every week, I try and bring you interesting people and interesting topics. And today is certainly one of those because I am joined not only by my brother, who you've now already met, Dr. Anton Bilchik, but I'm joined by the Honorable Maurice Williamson, and he is the New Zealand Consul-General to Los Angeles. And Maurice, thank you so much for joining us. And the reason for today's conversation is that New Zealand has, if I am correct, as of now, 0 cases of COVID-19, correct?
That's correct. And we've been zero now for 49 days consecutively. You will see every now and then a case gets reported, but they are always in the quarantine hotels as people have arrived in off an aeroplane. There were 2 in from India yesterday and somebody in from London that was testing positive. But in the general community at large, 0 COVID for 49 days.
So I was talking to my brother, Dr. Anton Bilchik, over the weekend, and he was talking about you as this remarkable individual who's been a member of parliament in New Zealand for 30 years and the success of New Zealand. And it must be fascinating for you, Anton, as a physician, and we've had many discussions about COVID. What was your immediate reaction in talking to Maurice Williamson about the evidence that New Zealand has handled this so incredibly well?
Well, Maurice and I are friends, neighbors, and rugby fans. And I've been somewhat deprived of rugby. And Maurice spontaneously invited me to come and watch a rugby game at his house, the Hurricanes and the Crusaders, 2 top New Zealand rugby teams. So I jumped at the opportunity, and we were sitting watching the game live on Saturday night, LA time. And the first thing that struck me was that no one was wearing masks. There was no social distancing. There was the stands were full. And my thought initially was, what's going on here? Is this taped? And then Maurice responded, no, this is live. This is real time. Guess how many COVID patients we have, or and I was shocked to hear the number 0. It just seemed, somewhat surreal. And I'm just looking at the picture behind you of the fans that night. I mean, you can just see joy and jubilation. So that's what struck me.
Otago Highlanders and the Waikato Chiefs. Am I saying that correctly, Maurice?
The Waikato Chiefs, yeah, and the Otago Highlanders, yeah.
So there behind me, you see scenes, and this is from Saturday, no mask wearing. So, we speak about the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda, and her remarkable ability to have led this country. So let's talk about her for a moment. And people might be watching going, well, there's so fewer people in New Zealand than there are in the United States, and they may be spread out. But let's look at what she has done to create a country that has really managed to handle this pandemic so well.
Well, Nadia, let me try to correct any of that concern about we're a much smaller country than the United States, and so you can't compare. I accept that, absolutely. But how about you just do straight comparisons? For example, my son's on a tennis scholarship in South Carolina. South Carolina has the exact same population as New Zealand, absolutely exact. We have had 22 deaths, and they have had 1,506 in the same population. And there are plenty of states that are worse than it. If you look at Arizona, which is only slightly bigger population than us, 3,304 deaths. So yes, I agree. You should never use statistics that compare New Zealand with the United States. But just bring us down to any one of the comparative size units you've got, such as South Carolina, which is identical. And 65 times as many deaths in South Carolina as in New Zealand.
So let's talk about the lady behind me, Jacinda.
Okay, well, Look, she's from the other side of the aisle from me. I was a politician in what you would call a Republican Party, and she is a Prime Minister from a Democrat Party. And we normally don't want to say good things about the other side. That's just how politics works. She's been fantastic. She's been outstanding. She's shown unbelievable leadership. And what she's done at every one of her daily briefings, because they became watched by everybody at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, people would gather around the TV, mainly to start with, because they were all locked in at home and couldn't do anything else. But she would give an update as to where we were, and she would defer to her medical people, the Director General of Health, a guy called Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, who's almost achieved sainthood status in New Zealand now because of what he's done. And Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, did just a magnificent job of taking really tough decisions, doing a real lockdown. And I mean, the lockdown was genuine. You weren't allowed to go surfing or fishing. And if you did, the police would arrest you. And in the end, it was for a reasonably short period of time. It closed the borders altogether. If you now want to fly into New Zealand, as I would like to do at some point, I've got to do 14 days into a quarantine hotel, and I have no choice. If I don't abide by that, I can be arrested and put in jail. She has done a spectacular job, as has the health people, and the total Director General of Health needs to be just recognised for that.
I'm so curious, but here's Anton. He's a doctor. He's dealing. He's a cancer surgeon, but certainly every single physician has been impacted by COVID. I mean, what would you like to ask Maurice at this point, Anton?
Well, again, I'm still shocked by the number 0 right now. I mean, it's not 5, it's not 10, it's not 100. There are 0 COVID patients walking freely around New Zealand, and I think that the short-term sacrifice, and there's no question. The country clearly sacrificed to get where they are now. But, here we are living in Los Angeles, waiting for the next shoe to drop. We have no idea whether there's going to be a full shutdown, whether this is going to be a partial shutdown. The numbers just continue to go up and up. And in the healthcare business, we're carrying on as best as we can. But if numbers get out of control, then it impacts emergency rooms, operating rooms, intensive care units, and that just leads to a standstill and puts people at major risk of health diseases such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, etc. So I'm still, I knew that New Zealand had done a good job, but I had no idea that they had got the number down to 0, and I'm still getting over the fact that happened. And then, of course, I want to go watch rugby. And
well, I want to ask this to the Consul General. Americans versus New Zealanders. Help us understand the mentality, because what about these people made them more compliant? I mean, I'm just curious, why can't we do what New Zealand has done?
Well, to be fair, there's a difference in size, and it's harder to get huge chunks of population to do what a smaller chunk would do. There is also a movement in the United States which says it's against our constitutional rights to be locked up in our houses and so on. When New Zealand first went to the lockdown, it was interesting. I thought, oh, here we go. This will prove very divisive and there'll be an anger. The New Zealand public, just across the board, accepted the lockdown, realised that it was in their best interest, that it could get to 0 as quickly as possible and then move out of lockdown. We've got a phrase now back in New Zealand that they're all free-range chickens, that people can just wander at will wherever they like. My wife said she was in a coffee bar the other day. Someone spilt some coffee beside her and they both bent down to wipe it up, but without any fear when you're sort of head-to-head with somebody in a coffee bar. And I guess that's the point that I really need to get through. It's a binary, 0 or 1. You either have no COVID or you even have a little bit. And if you've got a little bit, you can't be a free-range chicken because it could still spread. And that's what happened in Australia. They got to near zero. They didn't get to zero, but they got to near zero, and now they're on fire again. The state of Victoria, the state of New South Wales are just reporting hundreds of new cases, and it's just into a shambles again. But we basically had to get to zero, and then you know that there is nobody you meet in the street, nobody you sit on an aeroplane, nobody you sit at a coffee bar that has got it. And it's just made the public of New Zealand are just in such a state of euphoria that they can get out and do what they like. And as Anton said, sit in a huge stadium, jammed in with spit and spray and yelling and beer swilling, because they're loving their rugby and they don't have to go, oh, I wonder if anyone here's got COVID.
But won't that change? I mean, as things open up, as people, I mean, can you drive? You can easily drive from one country to the next.
No, we don't have any land borders with anybody. We're an island, but you can do anything you wish in New Zealand. There is no restrictions on anything in New Zealand. You can go wherever you like, stay wherever you like, have as bigger meetings, as bigger church groups, as bigger weddings or funerals or whatever. The only thing that's just still under severe lockdown is the border. So the border says that if you want to come into New Zealand, first of all, only New Zealand citizens and residents can come in automatically. We will allow others who are what's called essential workers, and we've allowed a big group of people that are coming in to do work on the Avatar movies, because James Cameron, the movie director, now lives in New Zealand. He's become a New Zealand citizen, as have many others in recent times. We allowed a huge group of America's Cup sailors in because we hold.
But they quarantine first, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Look, even if
at the expense of the government.
At the expense of the taxpayer. Now, even if the Prime Minister went overseas to a big prime ministerial conference somewhere, she comes back to New Zealand, she would not be exempt, as would I, from the 14 days into the hotel. You go in there, they have guards on the floors. If you try to leave your hotel room, you will be told, go back into your room. If you don't accept that, then you'll be prosecuted. So that's stopping it coming in, and it's vital. And I was really just quite sort of, I don't know, bewildered when I watched Brazil on fire with COVID, absolutely on fire. But when I checked the airline schedules, planes were flying from Brazil into the United States on a daily basis, full of several hundred people per aircraft. And I kept thinking, how can you let a populace pouring into your country through Miami, Los Angeles, New York, where the planes were landing, when that country is on fire with COVID? Now, they eventually did shut down the travel, but it took weeks. And it just didn't make sense to me that you would allow that.
But of course, as you said, right, it is an island nation. So, you know, the argument is it's a whole lot easier under those circumstances. But there's certainly things right now that we can learn from what New Zealand is doing. What other countries, when you look at, have been exemplary, both in terms of citizen compliance and how they've handled? What else comes to mind?
Well, I think Taiwan's a stunningly good example of what it did. And again, every country is different. There'll be some countries like Singapore where the populace will do as the government says and they'll just abide by it. And there are other countries that said, I'm not going to be told by this government what I do. I've got the right to do whatever I like. And there'll be everything in between. But I wouldn't be too strong about that, oh, you could do it because you're an island. We just closed our borders. So we still have boats coming to us. We have yachts because there's a big migration of yachts to New Zealand. And we just basically said, you can't come, and we will have fisheries patrol vessels arrest you if you try, and private jets can't come in. If you're one of the movie moguls that are coming in to make a movie, yes, you can land your private jet, but off you go to the quarantine hotel immediately. The other thing was the lockdown. When we announced a lockdown here in Los Angeles, I went straight to my office and I drew up some digital certificates for all my staff, and they put them on their phones, but they also had them in the glove box of their car. So
sorry, that repeat that, digital
certificates, which gave them the right to be able to be out on the street because of diplomatic immunity. Okay. Diplomatic immunity and can travel. And I gave them all of these, and I said, now, if you're stopped by the police, or when you're stopped by the police, you'll be able to show this, that you've got a right to be doing what you're doing. That was the biggest waste of time I've ever done, because lockdown in Los Angeles didn't look much different to a normal day. People were out and about. People were down on the beach at Santa Monica. I was down at Venice one day and there was about 30 people jammed up at the crosswalk waiting to cross to go onto the beach, and not one of them with a mask on. And I kept thinking, what happened to the lockdown?
Yeah.
No one seemed to police it. No one seemed to adhere to it. Whereas in New Zealand, and interestingly, we're not a sort of rat on our neighbours type population. We don't like people who rat on somebody. But boy, people were calling up and saying, I've just seen somebody biking down on the bikeway, at the parade or whatever, and the police would go down and arrest them. Because
so the question remains, right now, as of today, here we end July, what can we do? I mean, the reality is, the horse is out of the barn, so to speak. In your opinion, and then I'm curious to hear from Anton as well. I mean, what would you, if you were right now running this country, what would you say to all of us?
Well, I'm not sure you can run this country from the federal position, because I think the states have got different. I mean, if you're in Montana or Idaho, I would imagine farmers in the back of Montana don't wear a mask when they're plowing their fields because there's nobody within 300 miles of their farmhouse. So you can't. But what I would do if I was California governor, I would go back to a full lockdown, and this time I would actually do a New Zealand style lockdown. Now, it's hard. It's very difficult on everybody. We were allowed to go to the supermarket, but if you were found by the police anywhere other than the distance between you and your nearest supermarket or your nearest pharmacy, you could be prosecuted, and were. And a full lockdown, and they did a 4-week and then they extended it to another 2 weeks to guarantee they got to that 0 level before they could.
Now, so that's your message right now to the governor.
Yeah, I just say go back to it, because imagine what it would be like if in, say, 6 weeks' time, California were free-range chickens, and California didn't have to care what they did, where they were. Now, there is another problem, and this will be very controversial in the United States, is introducing interstate borders. They've done it in Australia. Australia has a whole lot of states like America does, and has a federal and a state system. You would never have borders between New South Wales and Victoria, or borders between New South Wales and Queensland, all of the states. They've put police stops with barriers and bars and arms, and even at river crossings, and you can't cross from one state to another unless you have a reason and you're considered to be an essential worker and you've got a health certificate to show you've been COVID tested and so on. So they were trying to say, not only are we going to fix our state and get it tidy, but we're just not going to let you flow in. And I guess that's one more point I'd like to make. My son, who's the tennis player, he flew from the East Coast the other day on an airline I won't name because that would be wrong, but on an airline who said on their website, we don't sell the middle seat. He flew on a big 777, one of the big 450-seater airplanes, and when he got off at LAX, he said to me, there wasn't a spare seat on the airplane. Everyone was jammed hard up against each other. No one was wearing masks, and the plane was jammed full.
Now, when did you say this was?
That was about 3 weeks ago.
Okay, so, I mean, again, you want to know why we're still now. As I'm listening to you, I know there's some politicians who would be listening to this and going, it's unconstitutional. What about our freedom? And I think what you just said is there's Jacinda Ardern, a different political party to you, but you're still laudatory about how she's handled this. This has become so divisive in America. Wearing a mask has become political. How do we, I mean, we are now looking at how we move on. How do we change that?
Well, first of all, can I just say to you, wearing a mask should not even be close to something that's political. It's like wearing a seatbelt. Do Democrats wear seatbelts and Republicans don't? I mean, how much of a nonsense does it sound?
Do you agree that this has become divisive? There's still people.
Yeah, I don't understand how come, because what we have in New Zealand is this motto. It's called a team of 5 million. And the whole team plays as a team. And if someone doesn't play as the team, they get dealt to. And the results have been fantastic. I just don't understand it. The wearing of a mask gets to me. How that could in any way. I've seen some clips from places in the Midwest and the South where there have been groups of school mothers saying, you know, we've got a right not to wear a mask, and they're all jamming against each other. And I'm going, what are you doing?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't make sense.
And
it's my right not to have to do this. Well, I guess you'd had the same argument when your government made seatbelt wearing compulsory.
so, again, Anton's at the forefront. He's seeing people in ICU. He's seeing the impact as a surgeon. There was a period of time where surgeries in Anton's area of surgery were put on hold if they weren't high priority. Anton, has that changed?
Yeah, I mean, we're back to we're allowed to do elective surgeries, but there's certainly this undercurrent, this feeling, as we follow the numbers. Maurice just pointed out to me just a short while ago that we've now already passed 150,000 deaths in this country. I knew we were close, but that was a number that was I thought we might hit by August the 1st, and we're at July the 27th. And that's just a frightening number. And there's this real concern that at any point, things can change, which is going to impact hospitals, that there could be, if there's a surge, that we could go back to holding off on doing elective procedures. Right now, certainly at our hospitals, everything is under control. The emergency rooms are open. The intensive care unit has capacity. The hospital is back to doing elective surgeries. So we're fine. But I mean, this is just a moving target. So again, it gets back to my feeling on Saturday, sitting with Maurice and listening to
I'll
the
go
real
back
detail.
to my great picture of watching the fans on Saturday's rugby match in New Zealand. Here they are.
Yeah.
No social distancing.
No.
And no social distancing necessary because Maurice says they're free chickens.
Yep. Free range chickens. We can wander at will. You can go up and hug someone. You don't have to, and it's unbelievable. And it's that binary, that 0 and 1, not, oh, we don't have much, or you might not catch it. It's you cannot. If I dropped you into the middle of New Zealand right now, Nadia, you could wander at will. You could talk to people, hug people, cuddle them, have a coffee with them, and it has made such a difference to the country.
Now, shifting slightly, I mean, many people are actually trying to go to New Zealand. It's become somewhat of a, I can't say a joke, but people are going, why don't I go to New Zealand? Have you noticed immigration and application for immigration going up?
We've been run off our feet by phone calls and emails saying, what is the story about a migration to New Zealand? What are the rules and so on? And sadly, we've had to go back and say, well, right now, we're not allowing anybody that's not a New Zealand citizen or a New Zealand resident to come into the country. We just have to. Otherwise, I mean, the quarantine hotels couldn't cope. If we had tens of thousands of people, you wouldn't have the facilities for them. As it is, the quarantine hotels are quite stretched. Some friends of mine who went back from LA 2 days ago arrived and were taken by aircraft straight to Christchurch, a city in the South Island, to the quarantine hotels because the Auckland hotels are all busy. So, but normally we have a very open immigration policy based on if you've got skills, if you can speak the language, that is English. We're a very monolingual country. Sadly, we don't speak multiple languages. If you're younger or whatever, you get a lot of points. You get points for age, you get points for skills. If you're a qualified person, you can almost guarantee to be granted a work visa or even a resident visa. But at this point in time, no.
I was just saying, though, probably applications, but not necessarily acceptances. Now, the other thing, New Zealand is very LGBTQ friendly. And in 2013, you made a speech that made history. And can we talk about that for a moment? You said it even took you by surprise. It was about gay marriage, and it made you an icon in Japan.
Yes, it really was a surprise. I wasn't even planning to give a speech, excuse me. And I got a text come up on my iPhone from the people down in the parliament saying, you're supposed to be down here. You're scheduled to be speaking on the gay marriage thing. And I thought, oh, gosh. So I raced down there, didn't have any time to prepare, did no preparation whatsoever, just jumped up when it was my turn, took an impromptu speech. And basically, I thought gave what was just straight common sense. Like, it wasn't that I'm pro or anti or whatever. I just kept running the line. If gay people want to get married, how does that affect you? How does it, change your life? You won't even know if next weekend down the road a gay couple got married. And I made a bit of belittling of the sort of the very strong religious groups in New Zealand who basically said you'll burn. One vicar told me I would burn in the fires of hell for eternity if I supported that legislation. And I said in my speech, I've got a degree in physics, which I do have. I've got a degree.
Yes.
And I said, I've worked it out that the furnace was 5,000 degrees, and I've worked out what my humidity was and my body weight. And if you put it into the formula, I'll last for just on 2.1 seconds. So this idea that in the year 2013, you would threaten a person that they would burn for eternity in some fiery furnace somewhere if they supported legislation, I just found that bizarre. And one of the people, again, a vicar in one of the extreme churches there, New Zealand was going through quite a serious drought at the time. When you drove through the country, instead of its beautiful lush green, it looked very much sort of Iraq or Afghanistan brown in terms of we'd had so little rain. And he claimed on television that it was the gay marriage bill that was the cause of our drought. Well, what was so good about that was on the day we were passing the legislation, the place turned to just absolute pouring with rain everywhere. The country was just being, and across my electorate, I had a picture sent down to me from one of my staff, which when you looked out the window of my office, there was this huge big rainbow across all.
Yes.
And so that's when I said, oh, well, I'm using in my speech the enormous gay rainbow across my electorate. And that became the gay rainbow speech. And next thing they were wanting me on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And I was being invited to BBC One and BBC Two and all of the Australian television.
And by the way, to see that and to see your Twitter, please go.
Okay, well, if anyone looks at my Twitter handle, which is just Williamson_NZ, if they just look at it, it's only a 4-minute long speech. And all it basically says is, what are you worried about? And I think I said in the speech, we're not declaring nuclear war on a foreign nation, or we're not bringing in a virus. Actually, a bit premature with that one. We're not bringing in a virus that
was a landmark speech, and I think you gave hope and inspiration, and it was very iconic.
Well, Nadia, what was good about the speech, and I think this is what I feel so good about it, is it put an end to the opposition almost immediately. You felt like a bit of an idiot if you still tried to claim it was evil and wrong, and that's what it did in New Zealand. When the speeches were over and the bill was passed, we all went off and had dinner and never mentioned it again. And it's never been raised. There's never a big movement against it or whatever.
And you're a rainmaker.
And we made rain. Boy, it poured with rain. It pelted with rain. But again, in the year 2013, if anybody thinks that passing gay marriage legislation in the parliament makes the drought in your country occur or the earthquakes happen, I'm really worried for mankind if that's what they can believe.
I would love to be a fly on the wall when you and Anton watch rugby. Behind you, tell us about the scene behind you.
Well, he was quite offensive because he showed up wearing a Springbok jersey. And he still got it with him right there. I thought he might.
Yes.
Springbok jerseys. I've got my New Zealand All Blacks. If I
told him, I said to him, he wanted to actually thank you. Anton wanted to wear his South African rugby. I said, you can't do that. I said, the only thing both of you can do is the haka.
No, I thought it was good that he did, because when the South Africans won the last Rugby World Cup, only one country at the Rugby World Cup beat them. And I'll let you work out what that country was.
No, I mean, it's so unifying sport. And the fact that on Saturday in New Zealand, you had people not having to social distance because there are 0 cases of COVID as we speak is remarkable. So the scene behind you,
just quickly look at Major League Baseball today. 2 of the teams have got cancelled because and that's without an audience, because the teams have got it. And so now they're working out how many other teams in the Major League Baseball can play each other. We might all have to go to New Zealand.
But Nadia, there's something else that was pointed out to me yesterday, is that the South African rugby team was considering going to New Zealand next year, and they're not practicing
Yeah.
So they may not be able to go. And just judging by the standard of rugby I saw on Saturday night, as much as I support the Springboks, I'm not sure that, I think they need a little bit of practice before they get on that plane.
Maurice, what you don't know about my brother, Dr. Anton Bilchik, is that he used to play rugby. And my husband, Steve Kessler, used to play rugby. Now, did you ever play rugby yourself?
I did too.
Oh my gosh. What position?
What I think I should tell you about New Zealand is rugby is not a sport, it's a religion.
Yeah.
Yes.
So central to our country because we're so small, we can't be great at basketball and we can't be great at soccer, although we have made it to the Soccer World Cup a couple of times. But we've picked on one sport that a small country can do well at, and we take on the absolute mega giants of the sport and quite regularly beat them.
So behind you, we still didn't get to what was behind you and why we all want to go to New Zealand once lockdown is over and we live in a coronavirus-free world.
Well, even if we had been pre-COVID, one of the things I'd have told you in an interview like this is I've traveled the world. I've been to 98 countries now. That's not half, but it's just on half of the world. And I've seen some beauty, spectacular scenery. I've seen some fresh air and lakes and rivers. But what you will see in New Zealand is that you'll see every one of those things within a few hours drive of each other. You can go to the mountains and go skiing in really good powder snow. And then an hour later, you can drive back down and be at the beach and be surfing or go fishing or go deep sea fishing and catch marlin. You can go into the mountains in the South Island. You can go, the scenery. And while I was Minister of Customs for 6 years, we did exit interviews of tourists who had stayed in the country, and we asked what they liked. And without doubt, the overwhelming was just I just cannot believe how beautiful your country is. I just saw things that I just don't believe. And the other thing, that the second one or third one down the list was, we can't believe your police don't carry guns. Because when you get out of the airport in New Zealand and walk around, our police don't carry guns because you're not allowed to own guns in New Zealand. You can have guns on a farm and you can shoot wild animals and you can go deer hunting, but you can't just carry guns around the town or carry them with you or whatever. And so the police...
But Maurice, if they look like any of those rugby players, I'm not sure they need to carry guns.
That's it. I do want to also point out it was Jacinda Ardern's 40th birthday yesterday. Yes. She is the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And one thing that people have been talking about is that women-run countries seem to have handled the COVID crisis better. Any thoughts on that, gentlemen?
No, I think there's no doubt that that's true. And I think that women, I was in the cabinet when Jenny Shipley became the first woman Prime Minister of New Zealand in my party. And the sort of manner and the process and the ethos that a woman leader brings is very different. It's not confrontational. It's not, let's get in and really smack the other side as hard as we can. It's how do we find a solution to that? And we've now got a leader of the opposition, a leader of my party, as a woman, and she will be up against Jacinda at the coming election as a woman. And so we've had 3 women prime ministers already. We were the first country in the world by a million miles, Nadia, by a million miles to give women the vote, long before anywhere else in the world had even thought of it. New Zealand was first country in the world to give women the vote. And I think Jacinda Ardern, again, it's a little bit like saying rude words in church for somebody from the Republicans to say anything good about a Democrat or vice versa. She has been spectacular, and the public have seen what a job we've done. Now, we've still got some economic issues to face because it's hurt the economy. Tourism is still hurting. I get all that. We understand all that. But the moment you just open the doors to the rest of the world at present, you've got COVID and now no one can function. That's the whole point. You've got to try and stress to people, oh, you want to open up the borders? Right. Well, then you'll close everything. Because once you have COVID back in, and I think one of the better lines I heard here in the United States was one of the sort of ICU nurses saying that she couldn't believe people wouldn't wear a mask. She said, if you don't like wearing a mask, you're going to love wearing a ventilator.
It's so hard. I've been having conversations with my brother, Dr. Anton Bilchik, and my other brother, Dr. Brian Bilchik, and my sister, Dr. Tanya Bilchik. We've been speaking about this for months. And it's hard to understand the mentality. It's hard to understand the divisiveness. But certainly, it's been a fantastic conversation. Any last thoughts? And Anton, anything else you wanted to ask Maurice, or Maurice, you want to ask Anton?
No, Maurice said something also very, entertaining. I asked him on Saturday night, what if someone doesn't like staying in their hotel room for 2 weeks? What option do they have?
And what did he say?
I said that if they don't like their hotel room, they're going to love their cell block.
But I want to ask you,
because we did put people into prison cells.
Okay.
Now we're staying in some of the most beautiful hotels, and the meals are all provided, and the laundry.
Okay, but let's say, like right now,
yes.
Your wife I know is in New Zealand right now.
Yes.
But let's say Anton and I decide we're going to visit New Zealand right now. Can you get a flight?
No. Well, first of all, you can't visit New Zealand now. Only people that can go to New Zealand are New Zealand citizens and New Zealand resident, or you apply for a special purpose grant.
You've got a parent there or something.
No, not even that. Well, parents maybe, or dying parent maybe. But if you were like the Avatar crew, they've got hundreds of millions of dollars making of movies down there. So they made the application, and as long as they did the 14-day quarantine, they were allowed. That was.
Are there flights? I mean, are there flights?
Oh yes, there's a flight out of LAX every night back to New Zealand, but
it's only so you could go home and you could quarantine for 2 days.
14 days in the quarantine and so on. Look, I just wanted to pick up on one point about the difference between the United States and New Zealand. It's very difficult to compare. That this country was built on a sort of a lot of Wild West and people having to live in remote isolations by themselves, keep themselves alive, protect themselves, defend themselves. And so a mentality of, we don't like the government telling us what to do, and we've got a right to it. And I do understand that. But if they understood the long game, would they rather the government tell them what to do for a very short term and then be free-range chickens? Or would they rather have this go on for months, actually years? I think you'll see this running well into next year. I think the vaccine hope of it being this year is very hopeful. And I think you will have, so the damage is continuously being done over and over, whereas we took some short-term pain and we've now got that long-term gain. And that would be, if the message I could get through to anyone watching this who is saying, oh, what an idiot and who's going to be like New Zealand, is that if you were prepared to take that shutdown, lockdown, stay at home and get this thing dealt to, you won't believe how good you feel after it when you can just wander at will.
Nadia, I have a question for Maurice. So assuming the Springboks can practice again and they get fit, and what is, I'd like to know from Maurice, when the Springboks play New Zealand next, what do you think the score is going to be?
I don't think anything other than a huge margin to the All Blacks, probably 200 to 300 points margin.
Okay, so can we agree when the rugby comes, do you have a favorite team? Are you even allowed to say?
Me?
Yes.
Well, it depends. Do you mean an internal New Zealand team?
Yes.
Well, because I'm from Auckland and I've grown up all my life in Auckland, I could hardly be anything but the Auckland Blues.
Right.
Sadly, the Auckland Blues have been rubbish for years, and they shouldn't be. They're the biggest franchise. They've had the most money. They've got the biggest catchment of players, but they've been absolute rubbish. But this year, they are playing out of their skin and winning against, beating the Canterbury Crusaders, who are normally, I hate to say this again, this is rude words in church as well, but the Canterbury Crusaders from the South Island have normally been the best rugby team in New Zealand.
So what do you miss most and what do you like most about living in America?
Well, first thing about living in the west side of Los Angeles, Santa Monica, is you can't put a price on the weather.
Oh, yes.
The weather is just outstanding every day. And I mean, and I don't mean, because what I don't like about some parts of America is it gets so hot and so humid that you can hardly walk outside. And then when the winter comes, it's so cold, you've got to shovel snow out of your driveway. Here on the west side of Los Angeles, every day is just sunny and beautiful and lovely, and humidity's good. And you can't put a price on that.
Right.
But on the other hand, when pre-COVID, I'd want to go down to LAX to meet somebody, and it's normally a 20-minute drive.
Right.
It could be an hour and a half, even 2 hours on the 405, and still not make it because of traffic and so on. So fantastic things here. You want to go to any concerts, be it Fleetwood Mac or Elton John. It's spectacular. But on the other hand, I had friends living in New York, and I think this is worth saying. I had friends living in New York in a really tiny apartment for a fortune of rent. And I said, why? And they said, because there's every Broadway show you can think of, and there's every artist you can go to any of these sort of clubs and see that. And I said, wow. I said, how often would you do that? And they looked at each other and they said, we haven't done that in at least a couple of years. So, you can do it. But when you get to my age, because I'm very old, I can walk into a forest and be the oldest living thing there. But I don't go out to nightclubs and bars and hope to see the Kardashians or hope to be at a, whatever concert. Whereas for young people, this is paradise.
Right. And you've got 2 children, and they are right now studying in the United States.
Got 3 children. The older boy lives back in New Zealand, and the twins here, the boy is on a scholarship a tennis scholarship in South Carolina, and the twin daughter is living with me here in Santa Monica.
And she's in the makeup industry, which has been hugely impacted by COVID-19.
Just gone altogether. And what I couldn't understand when I heard southern states were reopening, in the announcement they were allowing tattoo parlors, massage parlors.
Remember, right.
And I kept thinking, I'd love to see how you do a tattoo and social distance.
Right.
Can you give us a clue how you do it? No, honestly, you think about the mechanics of socially distancing a tattoo. Maybe you have a gun and you just fire at it from a distance or whatever.
Exactly.
And nails. And I thought, why are you doing that? Because food, we have to get food, and we do go to a supermarket and wear masks and gown up and put on the hand sanitizer after. And food, I understand. But look, I haven't had a haircut in fact, my daughter's been cutting my hair to try and keep it looking.
She's doing a very good job.
She's done a great job, but it's a shambles. It looks like a wild forest on top of her head. But you don't need to have your hair cut. You don't need to get your nails done. You don't need another tattoo. You don't need to go to a massage parlor if it endangers the public. And a good lockdown would just say no.
Yeah.
And it's not saying we're going to stop you forever, because that's the message. That means we'll all go broke and we're all out of. It's if you do it properly for the right amount of time, then you can be completely open to do whatever you want.
Now, I do want to point out to whoever's watching or listening to us right now is that you, in fact, are the equivalent of the Republican Party in New Zealand.
Yes, my party.
Jacinda Ardern is the Democrat. So you're not saying this from a political point of view, because what appears right now is people who don't want to wear masks and who want everything reopened seem to be more prone towards the right, and people who are more pro-shutdown seem to be the left. That's how it appears. Does it make any sense?
Let's nail that straight away. I'm a Ronald Reagan Republican. I've been to conventions up here for many years, and to Republican Party convention. I am to the right of centre on economic stuff. I'm a fiscal conservative. I hate governments. I hate governments spending money they haven't got. They should be trying to live within their means, like you have to within your family, like you have to within your business, like you have to and this idea of, we're just going to put it on the time payment and the next generation can pick up the debt mountain. So I'm a Republican, true and true. But what is going on with the current Democrat equivalent party in New Zealand under Jacinda Ardern is nothing short of spectacular. And it's actually worthwhile saying that. I think politics is all the better for when the other side's doing something well, saying it. Just say, I think they're doing a good job. Because too many times it's always the other side's wrong. And I don't think any one side of politics can be wrong all the time. You just can't be wrong all the time. But if you listen to that tit for tat type politics, anything that one side of the aisle does, the other side says they're evil and wrong, and then they do it and they say they're evil and wrong. So yes, I'll have a few friends back in New Zealand who will say, what on earth were you singing? But honestly, it's just simply to do with the job she has done. You can't deny it. And the polls, there was a poll published the other night in New Zealand, which said, if there was an election held now, she would romp home with the biggest majority in the history of the country, not only just, but by a mile, the biggest majority in the country's history. So the public have got behind it. So instead of saying, you locked us down, you made us stay at home, we'll never, ever forgive you for it. It's the exact opposite.
Well, let's hope the Honourable Maurice Williamson, Consul-General from New Zealand, that the right people heard this conversation. Dr. Anton Bilchik, my brother, I'm Nadia Bilchik. Please, I'm going to post this interview everywhere. And for those of you who would like to be in touch via Twitter with Maurice Williamson, Maurice, won't you give us your Twitter again if you'd like to follow his wisdom advice?
Really easy. It's just my surname, which is Williamson, with an underscore and then NZ for New Zealand.
And so, Williamson underscore NZ. And to may rugby continue. Let's hope we have a wonderful conversation about the haka and other interesting cultural things as we all navigate this. And what a pleasure to have you join us and meet the people in my world and your world. And let's hope we're having a slightly different dialogue in a couple of months. Thank you both.
It would be wonderful if we could.
How do you say cheers in New Zealand?
We pretty much say cheers. Or there's a few Maori, you know,
like
Haere Rā is a Maori way of saying goodbye.
Haere Rā.
Haere Rā.
Or New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc.
Or just tot sense. Goodbye, auf Wiedersehen.
Bye. Great.
Thank you. Fabulous.